My neighbor watched me with a rifle and left dead fish in my mailbox. The terrifying true story. It started subtly. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The new guy across the street had a habit of stopping in front of my house, lingering a little too long. When I stepped outside to check the mail, I'd catch him staring. If I made eye contact, he'd suddenly pretend to admire the sky or inspect his lawn. At first I told myself it was nothing. People have quirks, and maybe he was just socially awkward. But then, things got weirder. One evening, I saw him sitting on his porch, cradling a rifle. He wasn't aiming it or anything, but the way his fingers traced along the barrel made my skin crawl. I told my wife, and she laughed nervously. "Maybe he's a hunter?" she suggested, but we both knew that didn't explain why he was sitting out there for hours, facing our house, barely moving. Then came the dead fish. The first one appeared in our mailbox on a Monday morning. I opened it up, expecting bills and junk mail, and instead, I was hit with the pungent stench of decay. Inside, a large, rotting fish lay on top of my letters. The scales were slick, and its dead, glassy eyes seemed to stare right at me. I gagged and dropped it immediately. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I knew, deep down, it was him. I reported it to the police. They took some notes, shrugged, and told me it was probably a prank. I pressed them about the guy across the street. They said unless he directly threatened me, there wasn't much they could do. The next night I caught movement outside my window. My stomach knotted as I peered through the blinds. It was him, standing in the street, watching my house. The street lamp cast long shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. And in his hands? The rifle. I called the police again, this time more forcefully. When they arrived, he was gone. They shined their flashlights around but found nothing. "Sir, are you sure you're not just spooked?" the officer asked. "There's no sign of trespassing, no direct threat." I wanted to scream. Did I have to wait until he actually aimed the rifle at me? Until he broke into my house? The next morning, another fish. This time, it was in my driveway, with deep knife slashes carved into its body. I was beyond rattled. I decided to confront him. My wife begged me not to, but I was sick of feeling powerless. I marched across the street and knocked hard on his door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing, but I could hear movement inside. He was in there, watching me, waiting. The thought sent shivers down my spine. I left, but I didn't feel safe. That night I woke up to a sound outside. It was faint, but distinct, the crunch of gravel under footsteps. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept to the window. My heart dropped. He was in my yard. I turned on the porch light and he bolted, disappearing into the darkness. I called the cops again. This time they took it more seriously. An officer stayed outside my house for a few hours, but there wasn't much they could do. I installed security cameras the next day. If the police wouldn't act, I'd gather my own evidence. The footage from the first night was chilling. Around 2 a.m. he appeared in my yard again. He stood still for almost 10 minutes, just staring at my house, clutching his rifle. Then, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the night. I showed the footage to the police. This time, they finally agreed to pay him a visit. But when they knocked on his door, no one answered. They called his name, pounded on the door. Nothing. Then, they checked the side window and found it smashed. They entered the house with caution. I held my breath, watching from my porch. Minutes later, an officer stepped out, his face pale. "Sir, your neighbor isn't here. And from what we found inside, we think he's been gone for a while." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean gone?" The officer hesitated. "We found a lot of weird stuff. A wall covered in photos of you and your family. Some of them taken from inside your house." I stumbled back. "Inside?" He nodded grimly. And a pile of rotting fish, stacked in his basement. Sir, your neighbor. He might not be who you think he is. I moved my family out that night. We stayed with my brother while the police searched. For him. They never found him. To this day, I still check over my shoulder. I still wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to see him standing outside my window, because he's still out there. Watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Your support helps us bring you more chilling tales like this. Let me know in the comments, what would you do in this situation? Stay safe out there.